According to Welsh folklore, the largest collection of remedies, cures, charms and spells utilizing the virtues of plants and flowers that we have were passed down to mortals from a fairy. According to the legend of Llyn Fach, a fairy maiden once married a mortal farmer from the Banau Brycheiniog region of South Wales. Their marriage was a fruitful one, with the mortal farmer being gifted otherworldly cattle which produced the most amazing dairy products, leading to their farm becoming incredibly rich and prosperous. They had children together and lived a happy life. But their marriage had a taboo to it. The mortal man was not permitted to strike the fairy maiden 3 times. Upon the 3rd strike, she would up and leave, back to her otherworldly home. Alas, she was struck 3 times, and so she did leave, taking all the cattle and the prosperity of the farm with her. However, she did not abandon her children. She met with her sons on occasion and took them to a place in Myddfai known as Pant y Meddygon, the physician's dingle. And there she would teach them the virtues of the plants and flowers that grow in abundance in this locale. She would teach them that grinding the seeds of banatl or banatlen, the broom shrub, and boiling it in a drink with honey would aid those struggling with urinary problems. The ground ivy, or llysiau'r gwerin as they called the plant, could be mixed with milk and water to cure those with whooping cough or bronchitis. Nettle helped with jaundice, and mugwort calmed hysteria, and so much more. They took her teachings and became the legendary Meddygon Myddfai, the physicians of Myddfai. Physicians to kings and common folk alike. The most respected physicians within Welsh lore, utilising remedies taught to them by a denizen of the otherworld. Croeso, welcome to this, the Welsh Witch Podcast, a podcast exploring the legends, lore and magic of Wales. I am your host, Mhara Starling, a Welsh witch originally from Ynys Môn, the Isle of Anglesey. Today's episode is focused on the lore of the natural world. My guest today is Alex, or, as she is better known online, the Lores of Nature. Alex currently lives in Somerset but has Welsh connections in her family. And via her TikTok, Instagram, YouTube and other social media presences, she shares the magic of the natural world, the folklore surrounding the natural world, with passion and gusto. Prepare to hear tales surrounding mystical islands covered in fragrant flowers that move and vanish in the blink of an eye. Merlin the wizard and his special oak tree. The Bardsey Apple, a special apple from a mystical island off the coast of Wales, and so much more. Oh, it's going to be an absolute treat, this episode. I hope you enjoy this wondrous, natural-focused episode of the Welsh Witch Podcast. Now, before we begin, a little disclaimer. We will be talking specifically today about folklore and old beliefs surrounding plants, flowers and herbs. Nothing within this podcast is medical advice. Please do not take anything that we're talking about from the perspective of folklore as medical advice. Neither myself nor Alex are medical professionals. We are discussing these things, the natural virtues of flowers and herbs and plants, via a folkloric, historic and curious intent. So we're not looking to give any advice regarding how to heal yourself with herbs and flowers. Please seek professional medical help if you are looking to do just that. Today we're talking about magic and folklore. So without further ado, get a nice beverage, sit down and enjoy this wonderful episode of the Welsh Witch Podcast. So hello, Alex, and welcome to the Welsh Witch Podcast. How are you this evening?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. I'm very glad that you agreed to come on to talk with me because this is an area that I'm not exactly hugely knowledgeable within. I remember I'm going to give something away now. When I wrote my book, Welsh Witchcraft, I actually had to be forced to write a chapter on plants and flowers by my editor because she was like, why have you got no like plant folklore? And I was like, because I don't want to tell someone that mugwort or something is used for this certain ailment within Welsh herbal healing and then be responsible for someone killing themselves with mugwort. I was so terrified about it.
This is a big concern of mine, actually. There's certain videos that I just won't make because I'm not going to give anyone medical advice. I'm not telling anyone to eat anything.
I know I'm jumping the gun now and talking about something we're going to discuss later on in the episode, probably, but we have these manuscripts from Wales about like herbal medicine and such. And I've read those. I know about them, but they're quite wild. Like they are often, at best, very good folk remedies and such, but some of them like drink mistletoe if you have a headache, things like that. It's like, I don't want to tell people to eat mistletoe. But anyway, yes. So I had to kind of be forced to talk about plants and flowers. As much as I do love plants and flowers and especially the folklore surrounding plants and flowers. But I just had so much fear that I kept it out initially and had to be forced. So I was very thankful that you came on and decided to come and grace us with your presence here because you are complete opposite. You are very knowledgeable, I would say, when it comes to especially the folklore and the knowledge behind certain plants. And I absolutely love your videos. So to start, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, like who you are and how did you get into plant and nature-based folklore and knowledge and such?
So I have a TikTok channel and subsequent Instagram channel called The Laws of Nature, and I talk about plant stuff. So it kind of started out as like the kind of more spooky side of folklore, I would say, but quickly branched out into, it's kind of anything that interests me about plants because it's just such a broad topic that I think there is a lot to talk about. And I found initially I thought people would only really want the spooky, witchy, weird kind of stuff. And that's always a hook. That's what I love. But I have found that people do really embrace the science and the sort of quirks of plants as well, I think. And that's been really interesting for me because that's like a big part of what I'm into as well. I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm bad at science, but it's just a special interest of mine and has been for a very long time.
In your videos online, you've touched upon quite a lot of plant and tree lore from the Celtic nations. I remember, I think one of the first videos I came across of yours on TikTok was about a very, I suppose, I wouldn't say problematic, but maybe a contentious area, which is Celtic Tree Astrology. It was Celtic Tree Astrology. I think I wasn't going to go into this because it's a big one, but it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? Because you have, especially, I don't know how involved you might be with the more pagan and witchcraft side of things, but in a lot of Celtic pagan spheres, some people take the Celtic Tree Astrology as almost Bible, as though it's gospel. And it's hard to get people to realize that a lot of it tends to be very modern, even though it's inspired by lore. And I'm just wondering, just to get us started, could you maybe give us a little bit of an insight into the Celtic Tree Astrology and what the origin of that might be?
Yeah, so I just thought it would be a cute idea to do a series because I had done a zodiac series before because there are plants associated with each zodiac sign, and it was just a fun series of videos. It was not serious whatsoever. It was just a thing I did, and it was quite popular, so I thought I'll just do this tree zodiac. That'll be fun too. And it blew up badly, I would say. As you say, a lot of it is a lot more modern. Like, people were very offended that I had presented this information. I didn't present it as fact. Unless it is a scientific video where I feel like the tone will be quite obvious that I'm presenting this as fact. I don't present anything as fact, and I also don't ever put my own beliefs onto any of my work. I always just present, these are the things that people believe. Isn't that interesting is basically the extent of it. But yeah, a lot of people were really quite upset that these more modern views are being represented as Celtic folklore. But my argument back was, it being more modern doesn't negate the fact that people do believe in it. It's still a belief system, so you can be respectful of that. It's based on the Ogham. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've only seen it written down. The Ogham tree.
Yeah, the tree oracle kind of. Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think I've never really looked into it much. And like you, I pronounced it Ogham or Ogham, I used to say, because I'm very Welsh. and then I got told off, I remember once, by my mentor. I had this lovely mentor when I was just getting into witchcraft and magic and all that kind of things. And my mentor, Julie, turned around and said, it's actually Ogham. And I'll never forget the way she told me that, because it made me feel about this big. And yeah, the Ogham is definitely something I've wanted to get into for a long time, but it's complicated because just like with Celtic Tree Astrology and such, there's a lot of, I suppose, mud in the field, and it's all become kind of muddled together, and it's hard to decipher what actually comes from older sources, what is more modern. And then, like you say, the authenticity of something being a valid belief is not dictated by whether or not something is antiquated. That's something I kind of try and push as much as possible because I am a modern Welsh witch. I don't pretend to be like, some lineaged traditional witch who descends from a family of witches who have practiced magic for centuries. I'm very open about the fact, no, I'm a modern witch, and my practice is inspired and informed by the past while still being rooted in the here and now. And it's interesting because Celtic tree, zodiac, and astrology and such, it's interesting to me that it's taken such a grasp on a lot of the kind of spiritual and magical circles. I even have, I think, a little card that I got given as part of a gift. It came with a little pin hanging up on my wall over there that tells me my birth tree based on when I was born. So it's even there. But yes, I think from what I've read of it in the past, it's inspired by older sources, inspired and informed by older folklore and older streams of belief, especially, as you say, the Ogham. But then it was also influenced by the one character that I think a lot of people listening who might have more of a knowledge of Celtic studies and Celtic paganism in general, there's one character in history that influenced a lot of modern pagan beliefs and presented it as though it was ancient, but wasn't, and that's Robert Graves. And Robert Graves managed to kind of, I think, twist the narrative a little bit and try to present it as something much, much older. But as you say, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not authentic and that people can't believe it. And I love that, yes. And I think one thing that I loved about your video in particular was that you made it clear, yes, it's more modern, but that doesn't mean it's not based on older things and things that come from the past. And I absolutely love that.
That's the point, And I think from a lot of the Celtic nations' beliefs were so jumbled and mixed together over time because of what the English were doing to everyone, let's be honest. And migration, and I think these things are great, like Saxon beliefs and Scandinavian beliefs coming in later on and things like that. I just think it should all be celebrated. There's not like a cut-off point where we can say anything past this point is invalid. Everything before this point is real, I suppose. It's all real if you believe it's real. And I think it's all interesting and fun. And there are echoes through time that call to all of these beliefs. So, it doesn't really matter how you're packaging that up. It's still the same. It's getting people interested in nature is what it boils down to for me. So
absolutely, it's a doorway. It's a little it's a gateway drug into it. So you have, as we've mentioned, you've touched upon various Celtic streams of folklore and belief surrounding trees and plants in your videos and your work. And specifically, I've stumbled upon a few videos you've done surrounding the folklore of plants and trees in Wales. And I just wanted to ask to kind of get a bit of a well-rounded knowledge of who you are. Do you have any personal connection to Wales or anything of that nature? Like, where do you come from and what is your connection to that area of the world?
Yeah, so my mum's side of the family are a mix of Welsh, Scottish and Irish, like a lot of Celtic nations people are. So I have that connection, and I was going to move to Wales a few years ago until life got in the way, but it's still on the agenda. I will at some point move to either Wales or Scotland. But I actually feel like, I don't know what it is about Welsh folklore, but I just find it so interesting. But I feel like it's so marginalised. A lot of people, even if you know nothing about the world of folklore and that side of spiritualism, people will know things about Irish folklore. There are certain characters from Irish folklore that everyone knows. I would say to an extent Scottish as well, but I feel like Welsh gets really pushed to the side. And I'm not like on a campaign to, I don't think I'm the person to be on the campaign to bring Wales to the forefront of the general mainstream population psyche or anything, but I think every little nudge in that direction, because it's such a rich history that just I feel like not enough people know about.
Absolutely. Very much agreed. That's pretty much the backing behind why I do what I do. Because I remember when I was younger, I had such an intense love of Welsh mythology and folklore, and I was privileged to have grown up with it. But when I came into my experience, obviously, is I came into paganism and witchcraft from a very, very young age. And started mingling and mixing with druids and other lunatics, as Christopher Hughes calls us. I love that term because it uses the lunar phrase. But anyway, that's me going down on a rabbit hole. But he kind of introduced me to druidry, and then I also came into various streams of witchcraft. And because of that, I have always been immersed in a Welsh stream of paganism and witchcraft, but I was always fascinated by how many people who seem to have an interest in folklore and mythology, even within Wales, are not as well versed in Welsh lore. Like, I remember meeting people who were obsessed with the gods and goddesses of Egypt and Greece, and they were obsessed with the mythologies of those regions and the folklore of places like Ireland because it is so well documented. But I felt like there just wasn't as much of a pull towards Welsh, and that might have been because of accessibility and not as much out there in terms of actual writing. So yeah, I think my personal vendetta was, well, if it doesn't exist, I'll put it out there. And I'm glad that there are other people like you who also put it out there as well. So that's why I had to have you on to come talk about the amazingness that is the lore surrounding plants and trees, because there's quite a bit. Now, just to kind of move on and ask you a very kind of serious question now to do with the actual theme of this episode. So we can't talk about Welsh plant lore, I don't think, without touching upon how fairy lore incorporates into the lore surrounding plants and flowers and trees. I'm a bit of a fairy nerd. I'm obsessed with fairies in general. And I've found that through studying various fairy lore, there is a lot of connections between fairies and the plant kingdom, especially in Wales, because we have certain folklores and myths and such that have connections with the fairies. One particular body of mythology that has built up around a certain historical aspect of Welsh herbal medicine has to do with a fairy, and that is, of course, the folklore surrounding the physicians of Myddfai, who were 13th century physicians or doctors, I suppose, of that age, who utilized a knowledge of herbal healing. And it was said through folklore that they gained that knowledge and that power of how to deal with plants and such via a fairy, because their ancestor was a fairy, and that, of course, came from the story of the Lady of Llyn van Fach and such. So fairies and plants have kind of always been intimately connected, I think. So I was wondering, do you know of any wonderful bits of folklore surrounding fairies and trees and plants and such?
There's tons, tons and tons and tons. I love all the little like tidbits, and it always makes me a bit sad that I can't make a whole video for my channel, because there wouldn't be enough to make a whole video out of it. But I love all the little odds and ends when you go for a walk in the woods, and I'm that person that's always pointing out the plants, like, oh, fairies sleep in those anemones. Anemones. Sorry, that annoys me that people say anemones. I just did it myself. They're known as like fairy hammocks. So, because their heads tend to hang. They would crawl inside on a cold night, and that's their little hammock and things like that. And like, I love that it demonstrates how people used to see the world. And when people walk, I'm not going to be one of those pretentious people that's like, no one notices nature anymore. But, you know, modern society, I don't think we do notice nature on the same level that people used to. Certain trees you couldn't cut down because they were fairy trees, like hawthorns. It was really, really bad news to cut down a hawthorn tree. So even today, you'll often see farmland with just one tree in the middle of the field, and it's normally a hawthorn. And it's just, maybe even the landowner doesn't know why. We've just never touched that tree. I don't know why. It's just there. It's the way we've always done it. It's because fairies live in it. It's a portal to the other realm, and you can't cut that down or they'll burn your farm to the ground. So I really love things like that we still observe today, but maybe don't know why. There's so many trees that fairies live in. Elder is another one. I've always found all the stories I've heard about elder trees are quite aggressive. I mean, fairies are aggressive.
Yes.
But the elder ones, like, okay, I think they'll take your children. If you chop down the branches or anything, you have to like ask permission and things like that. I just think it's very cute. I think it demonstrates how respectful people were of nature before. But there's also a lot of stories about plants that are toxic being fairy plants. And I think that's probably evolved from just a need to tell children, don't pick that plant, don't put that in your mouth. So it served a practical purpose as well, which I really love.
Yeah, definitely. I love the idea that we can learn a lot about the lore surrounding these things by just looking at things like the name of them. So the first thing that sprung to my mind when you were talking then was one of the terms for what are they called? Foxgloves. I couldn't remember the English name for them. One of the terms for foxgloves in Welsh is menig yr ellyll, which translates to the gloves of the elves or the fairies. So because they look like the gloves, but the ellyll were kind of quite scary and dangerous. And obviously foxgloves are quite toxic as well. So it makes sense that they would have been connected with that. And there's also a type of fungus that grows on rocks, which I think is toxic. I'm not sure. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they call it fairy butter or menyn yr ellyll. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of names like that are associated with certain plants and such that obviously have that fairy connection. And just from that little name, we can glean so much insight into what people believed about them and how they viewed them. What's interesting about the whole tree aspect as well is that in Welsh lore, we have the Cat Godei, which is the Battle of the Trees, which is a long, long poem that talks about various trees and how they would have fought in a battle, but it also touches upon other plants as well. And I can't remember exactly off the top of my head what that poem says about elder, but considering that elder is quite aggressive in folklore, it'd be interesting to look at, is there a connection there maybe between how the elder would have fought in battle? But yeah, it's a fun one. And I remember I don't know if you have stories like this as well, but being a child and being taken on walks and such around the countryside, there were certain flowers and certain plants that your parents would point out and say, well, that's where the fairies live and they hide under there. The most obvious one, of course, being toadstools and such, where we would always be taught that fairies lived in mushrooms and toadstools. But heather is another one that my family used to always tell me, the fairies dance on the heather in the summer and such. And yeah, again, foxgloves. Foxgloves have always been associated with fairies in my mind because they do look like little fairy houses as well, don't they? So one thing I'd love to talk about, especially considering as we're saying, the connection between fairies and plants, is a certain trope or motif within Welsh folklore that I think gets overlooked a lot. We talk a lot about, at least in my circles, I don't know what it's like in the broader sense, but in my circles, when we talk about the otherworld, we often talk about Avalon, which is seen as this chthonic underground realm where the otherworldly characters live and such. And they are really fascinating, and I did a whole episode about them last month. Whereas there is another element to the otherworld within Welsh folklore as well, and that's in these moving, vanishing, disappearing islands that appear off the coast. And I know some people might be thinking, well, what do islands have to do with plants and flowers? But when you actually read the descriptions of these islands, they're often said to be lush and covered in rich, vegetation and flowers, especially aromatic flowers and pretty, beautiful things. So I'm wondering, you did a video on the Islands of Enchantment, or the Green Meadows of Enchantment, and how they not only connect to Welsh folklore, but also another part of the UK as well. So I'm wondering if you could maybe give us a little bit of an introduction into the idea of these islands.
Yeah, sure. They're very much connected to where I am now, Somerset. So, and also I will say Cornwall as well, because Cornwall has a very strong Celtic history as well. But yeah, it's fascinating that even if you're skeptical of this kind of existence of spiritual creatures, there's no denying that there are people not attached to the folklore whatsoever, people that had never heard of it, whatever you want to say, who swear that they saw these islands. We have documentation of sailors coming from other countries and things and saying there was an island there a second ago and it's not there now. What's going on? And then coming onto land either on the English side or the Welsh side, and people being like, oh yeah, it's just the Meadows of Enchantment. So, yeah, a lot of people would say that they would see these islands that sort of appear and disappear. Some stories say that you had to stand on a really specific place to see them. There's one story, I've got his name written down. What's the guy's name? I want to say it's Griffith. He discovered the place where you have to stand to see one of the islands. And he realized, he went to get his boat, to go to the island, and it disappeared as soon as he moved. So he realized, I can't move off of this spot and get to the island. So he cut turf out of the ground, carried that with him. So the magic was still activated, I suppose, took it on his boat, and he actually managed to get to the island. And the story goes that the fairies were very accommodating. I can't imagine that, knowing what I know, but they were apparently thrilled that he'd managed to get there, and they were excellent hosts. And he looked around, and it's a very lush, green, pleasant island it's a fairy garden, essentially, growing all of their favourite plants, their herbs and flowers and things that they enjoy. A land of abundance, but the exchange for him being allowed to land on the island was that he has to leave the turf behind. And they say that that's how it's no longer accessible. It's not something that people really see in the modern day because he ruined it for everyone. That's why we can't have nice things.
Oh, of course. There's always one who wants to ruin it. Yeah, there's a similar story ish from Llyn Cwm, which is a lake where it was said that there was an opening so this lake, it used to have an opening that would only appear once a year at May Day, so Calan Mai in the Welsh tradition, which Calan Mai is already associated quite a lot with fairies, so it makes sense that there was this opening that would appear near Llyn Cwmcoch every year on May Day, and it would transport you, this opening, to an island that was in the middle of the lake, and it was invisible to the human eye from the shore, but once you walked through this doorway that would appear in the rocks once a year, you would be transported to that island. And that island was said to be, like you're saying, this place of lush plants and growth, and there were these glorious flowers, these aromatic flowers that filled the air with their lovely scents. There were these glorious gardens, lush vegetation, and there was like enticing, I can't speak today, there were these enticing fruits and exotic fruits as well, things that people hadn't seen before. And it was said that the people who were local, who were nearby to the lake, they knew about this secret that once a year there was an opening, and they'd go every year. And the fairies, like you say, on that island were very accommodating and very nice. And they would play them music, and they would dance with them, sing with them, feed them glorious foods. And the one rule, which is very kind of almost Hades-like in the Greek tradition, the whole do not eat certain foods when you're in the underworld. The one rule was you could eat and partake in whatever you want while you're on the island, but you cannot take anything off the island. And it was said that someone selfish once put some stuff in their pocket and left, and the doorway never opened again. It never opened for anyone ever again. So there always has to be one, doesn't there, that ruins it for everyone. Oh my goodness.
That's quite a common, so that the thread of that story is very common throughout all different kinds of folklore. I find that really interesting when there's a common theme amongst lots of different nations and cultures and beliefs, that's just, it's such a human thing that there's always you can have this lovely thing, but just don't take the mick. And someone's like, some grapes in my pocket, I'll take those home.
Yeah. I think it says a lot about human nature, unfortunately. Oh gosh. And it's interesting as well because there is, as with fairy folklore, like we're saying now, these fairies were very hospitable and nice, like the ones on the island that you mentioned and the one in the middle of Llyn Cwmcoch. They were very hospitable and friendly and amicable, I suppose, with the humans, the mortals that would come to these places. And as with all fairy folklore, there's always contradiction. I think fairies just exist in this contradictory place where if you find one piece of folklore about them and you say, this is what fairies are like, you will find 10 other sources that say completely different. And a different story surrounding the islands that I've personally heard is there was some on the coast of Pembrokeshire where it was said that these islands would appear specifically on market days, and that the fairies would come onto the shore of the mortal world to shop at the mortal markets. And the interesting thing about that one is because there's all these descriptions of these islands being lush and covered in these amazing plants and flowers. And yet, in these versions of the stories, they can't grow food on them, though. Yeah. And that's why they need to come to the mortal markets. So I find it really interesting that fairies are both living on these places that are lush and covered in glorious trees and plants and flowers, but they can't grow food. So they have to come and eat ours. I absolutely love that. And the connection between them.
It kind of makes me think all of these stories where there's an element of give and take make me think that it's all sort of an allegory for being respectful of nature. So ones where they also have to rely on humans by coming to the markets, because we have stories about that in Somerset as well. And the stories sort of all say that the fairies would never talk to anyone. And you could never be 100% sure that someone was a fairy. They would just be maybe small, very petite, very youthful looking, sort of elven features, but they would always pick up food and then leave the exact amount of money as well. But you wouldn't tell them how much they hadn't asked how much it was yet, but they always seem to know. But I feel like there's a lot of fairy folklore where there's a 50-50 balance between humans and fairies. And when that gets disrupted is when someone's trapped in another world, trapped for 100 years and then dies. All of their children are gone. Their property is on fire. Things like that. I really think we need more of this in the modern world, because I think it is how people used to convey that we have to mind the land as much as the land minds us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a way of kind of teaching morals almost, isn't it? And values to people. Yeah, you have to be, because there are similar stories. I know we're getting a bit too much into fairies now and not enough on plants. We will circle back, but fairies is something that I'm obsessed with. So there were also stories about how travelers who came at the door and asked, like, do you have any food to spare or some shelter for the night? There were a lot of stories, especially around the Eryri area, Snowdonia, where these travelers would come to the door and ask for something, and you should never deny them because they might be fairies. And if they're fairies and you say no to them, oh gosh, you're in for a storm. So beyond kind of herbs and plants, trees also feature a lot in Welsh folklore and myth and legend and all of that lovely things. And speaking of fairies, there's one magical character in particular who I wanted to talk about today because I know you've spoken about him in the past. And he's said to be, in some sources, because obviously with these stories there's so many different sources and so many different origin tales for a lot of these characters, but in some stories he's said to be the son of both a mortal and a fairy. And that, of course, is the infamous Merlin, or Merlin, as he's known in Welsh. And yes, to those listening who might not have known, he was Welsh in some stories, in some sources. He has Welsh origins, or Brythonic origins, I would say, because he tends to sit on that middle point where he's like, is he from Wales? Is he from the Old North at Hen Ogledd, which is right up in the north of what is now England and the south of Scotland? And there's also stories, of course, of him from Cornwall, similar to King Arthur, where he kind of comes from all over the place. But of course, at one point, this entire main island would have been Brythonic. The island of Britain, as we think of it nowadays, would have had a Brythonic origin. So it makes sense that a lot of the Welsh kind of texts, which are the direct descendant of the Brythonic language, have this interest in him. So Myddfai in particular has an association with trees. I don't know if you've ever heard of the connection between him and oak trees, but I know that the fairies also had connections with oak trees. They were said to be where you could see the fairies dance under every kind of Friday or Sunday or so it was. But he also has connections to oak trees, and he also has a connection to a very specific tree. And I think you know which one I'm talking about or referring to there. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the connection between the great wizard Merlin and his connection to trees within Welsh lore.
Yeah, I love Merlin. Oh, what an interesting character. And I think the Arthurian tales that we're told in the mainstream do him a massive disservice, because the whole thing could have been about Merlin, honestly, and it would have been a lot more interesting for me. So he was, it's even debated as to whether he was a wizard. That's, a lot of people believe that that's the kind of sanitized version of him. A lot of scholars, I suppose, say that he was a wild man. It seems quite likely from what I've read that he was a plantsman, basically, which is where the sort of wizardry aspect comes in the same way that healers became witches in the mainstream. Just having an extensive plant knowledge singled you out as a weirdo. Relatable.
Very.
But yeah, the story goes that he had a favourite oak tree that he absolutely loved. And when he was growing up, if he had any hard times, he had a lot of strife in his life, he would go to this tree and basically talk to it. And he felt that it was listening to him. And I'm sure there's a lot of other stories about, expanding on that, how magical that tree was. But he basically made a promise to the tree that it would not fall, not on his watch, not going to happen. This is the best tree. So he sort of, I don't know if you'd, for some it's a blessing, I would say, for some it would be a curse, but he said that as long as this oak stands, Carmarthen won't fall. And apparently the oak was there for a very, very long time. There's a bit of contention around that because there was genuinely an oak in Carmarthen that was dated back, I think, a couple of 100 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, but not long enough for it to have been Merlin's tree. But that's fine. And everyone sort of knew it as Merlin's oak, and everyone loved this tree, except for one person who was annoyed. It was used through time as a meeting space because everyone knew this one tree. So even when the town was built up around it, they were like, we cannot touch this tree. Very Icelandic kind of attitude to the fairies come first. We cannot touch this magical thing. And then one person who lived near it didn't like that it was used as a meeting place because it was busy and loud. So they set fire to it. Why? So it ended up being destroyed, and the stump stayed there for a long time. But as far as I know, it started getting a bit gross, rotting away and things. So they removed it, and now it's in a museum, I believe. But they have put in a new oak statue of like carving of Merlin to kind of pay homage to it. But the twist is that when the tree came down, they had record flooding. Supposedly the worst on record. The town was not in a good way that winter, so who knows?
Perhaps there's some truth behind it after all. Oh, I love that because the Welsh name for Carmarthen is Caerfyrddin, which literally translates to the fort of Myrddin or Merlin. So the fact that he's so associated with that region, and that region in general is loaded with folklore and all sorts of mythology, isn't it, as well? So I'm curious now because the Arthurian legends are something that I'm just dipping my toes into. I only know much about the Arthurian legends within the context of Wales. So, for example, I know a little about the Arthur of stories like Culhwch and Olwen, and the later Arthurian legends like Peredur, son of Evrawc, which are within the Welsh context. I don't know as much about Geoffrey of Monmouth's tellings or the French kind of sources surrounding Arthur and such. So I'm wondering, do you know of any other kind of plant-based knowledge there might be surrounding the Arthurian tradition?
Yeah, there's quite a lot actually, which I suppose shouldn't really be that surprising given the time period. But, you know, it's one of those things. I will say that I historically found Arthurian legend to be a bit dry, I suppose. It can be quite hard to get into, especially when you read one story and then you read another one. It's all subject to interpretation because the old writings are very... from what I know of, especially things like Old English, a lot of it is just open to what you think is going on. So it can be quite difficult to access that way. But I suppose the best example outside of Merlin is the Green Knight. Mm-hmm. So there's this knight who... he plays a complex character within the stories. It's not necessarily that he's a villain, but I would say it's on villainous lines where he is a bit of an agitator, but often used to agitate in such a way that he brings out the best in someone maybe, or, you know, shows someone who was maybe holding back a little bit to be a hero because of the way that he's agitating, if that makes sense. I find that really interesting that that's so complex. Maybe I'm doing a disservice to the people of the olden days that thinking they couldn't have such a complex character, but it's really interesting. But, you know, these academics that have been studying Arthurian legend for decades, even today, there's a lot of confusion as to why he's green, because he's described as having green armor and his skin is also green, his hair's green, like he's completely green. The general consensus, I believe, is that he's a representation of the Green Man, who is, well, even the Green Man, there's a lot of Can't talk about any folklore without, saying that there's, 50 different interpretations of this thing. But yeah, generally he is an embodiment of nature, natural processes and things. And there is one story where I think it's some kind of, I want to say like a joust, some kind of like tourney, some kind of battle, like, do you know what I mean? Like an entertainment kind of battle, like the battles that they used to do. And he turns up with a sprig of holly in one hand and a battle axe in the other.
The Green Knight in general has an association with, I don't know much about is it Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, is it? And I don't have much of knowledge of that story in particular. I do have it. I have a lovely folio edition that I bought from a charity shop, but I've never actually sat down to read it fully. But I think they have a connection with Lud's Church, is it? Because I visited there last year and it's glorious. It is like one of the most beautiful places ever. And it makes you feel like you're in another world entirely because it's this deep kind of gorge and it's covered in moss. And there's just so many trees and plants and flowers kind of hanging over the edges. And it's very muddy. That's one thing I did not expect. But we did visit at a time when it had just been raining. It's very muddy there. But I remember when we arrived there, one of the first things my friends told me, because we kind of went there on a whim. It wasn't a planned trip. We were in the Midlands doing Witchfest Midlands at that point, and someone said, well, it's only about 45 minutes from here to Lud's Church, and Lud's Church has a connection with Arthurian legend and the Green Knight and all that, so we should go and check it out. And I'm so glad we did, because it is beautiful. And I just want to put it out there for anyone listening. If you do get the chance to visit Lud's Church, it is a bit of a trek. I was dying on the way back because it's all uphill on the way back. But it was worth it because it's beautiful and it's there in is it in the Peak District? Or I get these mixed up. The Peak Districts, the Lake Districts, they're all mashed together in my head. Have you ever visited at all the Lud's Church?
I'd love to go. I would absolutely love to go. Someone did tell me, though, there's a lot of squeezing between narrow gaps, which I'm not built to squeeze anywhere. So I'll maybe look at it from afar, maybe stand at the top and gaze down. But yeah, it's there's a lot of folklore around Lud's Church even, and there's a lot of fairy lore about that. It's I believe you could only go in there at certain times because you have to ask permission to go in there from the Fae. I'd have to look it up again off the top of my head. But yeah,
oh gosh, I'm just panicking now. I'm like, oh my God, did I go in there without asking permission? Oh, but yeah, there is. It's a glorious place. Even just like the staircase, because the walk down there initially, you walk through this like kind of forested area. I remember we stopped at the car park and we asked a bunch of people there because, like I said, on a whim, we had no idea what we were getting into. So I was dressed in not walking clothes at all, and also had, I think, just like ballet slippers on, which not walking shoes, not very good walking shoes at all. And I remember stood in the car park seeing all these people in their like full on hiking gear and asking them, oh, which way is it to Lud's Church? And they kind of looked me up and down and then pointed me in the direction. And they were like, it's a bit of a trek, And I was like, we're fine. We can deal with it. I can handle it. And yeah, it's like a trek down this forested area first. And then the staircase that initially gets you into the gorge, as I call it, it's beautiful. It's like something straight out of a fantasy movie. And I'm surprised it hasn't been used to be filmed too much in because, like, oh, then again, being a bit inaccessible, I suppose, not good for cameras and such, but it is glorious. And I felt like I stepped directly into the other world. And speaking of the other world, I'm really good at segues today. Speaking of the other world, that's kind of another area where plant lore and the Arthurian legends kind of coincide because Avalon, or I said that very Welsh then, but Avalon, of course, the word Avalon exists in the Welsh language as the plural for apples. Yeah. And there is this association with apples to Avalon. There's some interpretations that say that Avallon, the original kind of Brythonic spelling of Avalon, means the road of apples. I did talk a little bit about this with Gwilym Morris last month in the last episode. I think only on Patron. I think I cut this bit out from the actual aired episode. But we talked a little bit about Avalon, and he was saying that the connection is actually with a old Brythonic king called Avachach, and then it was kind of the sources got mixed up with Avachach, who has associations with the Isle of Man, and then that became the Isle of Avachach, which eventually became Avachon, and then Avalon. But there is also other beliefs that it has something to do with this road of apples, and that apples have something to do with the idea surrounding Avalon. You have a connection to apples and orchards, don't you, specifically? And I remember once someone said to me that Avalon was a place of oak trees and apples, and specifically that apples grew on the oak trees. Is that a thing? Do oak trees have apples?
No. They could be thinking of they don't look like apples though. Sometimes on acorns you do get like a little sort of cankerous round thing. They look gross though. You wouldn't ever think like, oh, an apple.
It's always been something that has confused me, because I heard people theorizing that, Anglesey, which is where I'm from originally, was known for its oak trees at one point in history. Like, we have the whole history and the lore surrounding the idea of Anglesey being the island of the Druids, who were said to meet up in sacred groves and had associations with oak trees specifically. The name for oak tree in Welsh is Drew, which is druid, and so they were saying, oh yeah, there were these ancient oak trees that used to have apples on them, and so Anglesey might be Avalon because of that. And I was always a bit like, I don't think oak trees grow apples. But yes, that connection between Avalon and apples. And I was just wondering, on a personal level, if you could tell us a little bit about, because have you worked in orchards, is it, before? Or what is your connection to apples and orchards?
Yeah, so I used to manage a handful of orchards. I was the chair for an environmental charity, and it sort of managed a green space, quite a large green space, and part of that was a community orchard effort, and it was split up into a few orchards. There was one that was over 100 years old, but I named all of them because that's what I'm like. So that was my Victorian orchard, and it had sort of old plants that were popular in the Victorian era that are not really popular anymore, which is why I love that one the best. Like medlars and things like that. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're also known as the bumhole fruit.
Oh, I love it. You did a really wonderful video. I think I saw it on Instagram rather than TikTok, but it was all about a specific type of apple, which had to do with Ynys Enlli, or Bardsey Island, which, of course, to those listening who might not know where that is, if you look at a map of Wales, Wales kind of looks like an old lady reaching for her walking stick. So, and if you envision that arm of Wales that reaches out into the Irish Sea, just at the tip of it, there's an island, and it's called Ynys Enlli in Welsh, or Bardsey Island. And it's an island that it's already steeped in folklore and mythology, and it has this connection to the saints of Wales. It's said that it's the island where 100 saints are buried and such. I know the Druids of Anglesey do a pilgrimage there every year. And apparently I have heard whispers that it is a place of corpses, because apparently when they are kind of taking care of the grounds, they find a lot of bones, strangely. They're just kind of there, existing in the landscape. And the people who are there taking care of the island, they kind of are just so used to it that they fill bags with bones and they just leave it, which for me, as a spooky ooky witch who likes bones, is like a dream come true. I don't know how I'd leave the island without stealing a bag or two. But it also has something to do with an apple as well that you mentioned in one of your videos, which I found really interesting. And I just thought I'd ask if you would be open to telling us a bit more about the Bardsey apple.
Of course, it's my favourite apple. And side note, Bardsey is also where Merlin's buried, supposedly. So, yeah, it's amazing that such a tiny, tiny little piece of land, there must be like some convergence of energies or something over that space, because it's just wild that historically people have been obsessed with this island. So I think since the 13th century, before then, as you say, that druids used to go on pilgrimages there, and it was known as a site of worship, which I believe is why there was a Christian monastery built there. So this is a bit of a tangent, but it's interesting. When Christianity took over Britain, they had a really hard time persuading people, obviously, that your long-held beliefs actually not true. You need to believe in this one god, not this pantheon of gods, etc. So people did used to always meet around trees. So different parts of the country had different trees that they really liked. White oaks have always been extremely popular in the UK. But yew trees were also very, very popular. So it was kind of just a given thing that people would congregate, villages and things would congregate at the yew tree. They're very long-lived, they're very big. It's a good meeting place. So when they were sort of crusading around the UK trying to convert people to Christianity, a lot of Christian law was based on pagan folklore in order to make the transition for people's belief systems a lot smoother. So they would build their churches where the yew trees are, because people were already meeting there. So it was easier to say, why don't you just come to the church and meet? And that is the reason why today there's pretty much always yew trees in the graveyards of churches, because they're the old ancient yew trees that pagans used to meet underneath. Fascinating. I love stuff like that. So they build this monastery in this place that was already very, very special to pagans. And then that stood for hundreds of years until, I believe, mid-1500s, when Henry VIII destroyed it, because they disagreed with him and his many marriages. They sided with Rome, so he was not about that life, and had the place sacked. But in that time, obviously a lot of monasteries grow their own food, and they would have gardens and orchards, and it was very lovely. I'm sure it was amazing living there. And it's thought that someone just threw an apple out of a window or something. That's the most likely cause for this. But with apples, it's not a unique thing. A lot of plants do this, but they will never come true from seed. So if you eat an apple today and plant the seed from it, you will have your own apple tree, and it'll be a completely unique variety. You can name it, you can do whatever you want with it. Probably won't taste very good, because there's a lot of science and there's a lot of trial and error in making good apple trees, but you might get a really good one, you never know. And that will be uniquely yours. So if someone throws an apple out of a moving car, if you ever drive down a motorway and see an apple tree just on the side of the road, that's usually what's happened. It might be a really good fruit, you never know, but it will be completely unique. So they kind of grow based on the environment that they're growing in. They respond very heavily to that. So you could have one apple, take two seeds from it, grow one, I don't know, in Scotland, grow one in Somerset, and that you'll have two wildly different plants. But the Bardsey apple was undiscovered for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was just growing, chilling out, vibing on this island, until some bird watchers, I believe, came along, and they needed some fruit to put out for the birds, to draw the birds in so that they could see them. And they're like, it just happened that this guy is like a fruit expert. So he's like, I've never seen this apple before. How weird. And so they took some and had them tested, and it turned out to be a completely unique variety of apple. They named it the rarest apple in the world. And it turns out it's awesome. It's got like a lemony kind of flavour to it. It's really pretty. It's widely available now, but I love the story. Just, what other fruit do you know that has this wild, rich history to it?
Literally, so much just in that one little apple and the source it comes from. I absolutely love that. Oh, I love Bardsey Island as well. I've never actually been. I hope to one day go. I've stared at it from the coast, but I've never actually been on the island. And it's one of the reasons I'm really jealous of the modern Druidic order, the Anglesey Druid order, because they go there every year. And
Hmm.
they follow in that tradition, and they have a little house that they book out and rent out for, I think it's a week or two, and they're completely off the grid as well, because there's no internet or anything like that. You have to like climb to a very high hill to get any sort of signal on your phone. Barely any electricity. There's one little shop there for the people who come and stay on the island, because there is that rental kind of house that is there, but that's it. And I would love to just go there just to unplug one day and hopefully find some Bardsey apples, because they sound lovely.
People have been going there. Even in the Christian tradition, it was believed that if you made 3 trips to Bardsey, it was the equivalent of going to Rome, going on a pilgrimage to Rome. So a lot of people, thousands of people, would travel there every year trying to find salvation. It's just a tiny little island, and I just think it's amazing.
I think it just shows how obsessed we were with islands as well, because as we were saying earlier, these islands of enchantment, the Gwerddonau Llion, as they're known in Welsh, they are part of the mythic landscape of Wales, but also other regions. And it's something to do with, I think, the fact that we are disconnected from continental Europe. We are an island in our own right as well. A big one, albeit, but still an island. And we see islands as inherently magical and mystical, and that's been going on for thousands, probably, of years. Even within the Welsh texts, sometimes they alluded to the idea that Ireland itself, because it was an island off the coast of Wales back then, that in itself was also an enchanted mystical land. And you see this kind of enchantment built up around the idea of Ireland because of that. But yeah, I find it fascinating that it's part of both older folklore and then also Christian theology and cosmology, and it just carried on, and we just love the islands, it seems. Oh, well, I think that would lead us to kind of an end now and kind of wrap up. And I'm just so thankful that you were willing to come and share so much with us. As we are kind of reaching the end now, I thought I would ask you, do you have anything that you'd like to kind of plug, promote at the minute? I know I'm definitely going to suggest that everyone looks up your TikTok videos, your Instagram videos, your social presence, because you have the most wonderful videos on such interesting topics. And I definitely think everyone should check you out. But can you give us a little outro as to like, where can people find you and what have you got in store for us?
Yeah, so my channel is on a little bit of a hiatus at the moment. Having a little break, much deserved, I think. I'm trying to think of the sort of direction I want to go in with it, I think. But obviously all of my back catalogue is on there. And I'm hoping to get back into creating videos again very soon. I actually have bookmarked quite a few things when I was checking my notes for this talk today, so I found a lot. So yeah, you can find me at the Laws of Nature on Instagram and TikTok. I have my little Laws of Nature shop, which is in my links on my bios, I think. Other than that, I don't really do anything. I'm a designer by trade, so I will just do a little plug for my other shop. It's called the Slow Max. Max with 2 X's, SLOWMAXX. And that is a pop culture thing. Sorry, not a lot of plants, but there is some witch stuff on there, so.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, well, I just want to say thank you once again for coming on. It was absolutely wonderful talking to you about all things nature. And I will just reiterate that if anyone listening does not follow Alex over on the Laws of Nature across their socials, then to do it now, because it's so worth it. So yeah, thank you so much. And I hope that we'll get the chance to chat some more in future as well.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. I would just like to say another huge thank you to Alex for coming on and sharing some of her knowledge with us here on the Welsh Witch Podcast. Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you, the listener, for tuning in once more with the Welsh Witch Podcast. I know that the broadcasting schedule or the uploading schedule is a bit sporadic, and I tend to just put an episode out whenever I feel like it. I promise you there's a lot going on behind the scenes and reasons as to why the upload schedule is so sporadic, and I'm hoping that things will calm down and now it can be much more frequent that I can upload an episode. I have recorded numerous episodes with special guests such as Sian Sibley, Andrew Philip Smith, Jenna Talundre and Anwyn Avalon, among just a few guests up and coming here on the podcast. So do keep an eye out for future episodes coming out very soon. And if you are able to support the podcast in any way to help it so that I'm able to put podcasts out more regularly, then do consider becoming a Patreon. My Patreons help me with absolutely everything. They help me keep doing what I am doing, keep putting out the magic of Wales. So I want to extend a huge thank you to all of my patrons for supporting me and aiding me in ensuring that I can do things like this. Thank you so much for listening. All of Alex's information will be available in the show notes, so you can check out Alex via the links below wherever you are watching this on, whether that is YouTube or podcasts or wherever. And she's available as The Laws of Nature at The Laws of Nature online. Thank you so much. See you soon. Goodbye.